So what's new with LXC3? I tend to have I'm keen on packages with a 3 in the names. As you saw, Mailman 3, LXC3. So first of all, what is LXC? It's just because I want to make sure that we all start with the same knowledge about it. I'm pretty sure it's useless, but I will still do it. LXC so it stands for Linux containers originally. It's essentially a process that allows to run a new PID and mount namespace in order to have a whole tree of processes under just one. It's not full virtualization because it depends on the host kernel, and henceforth, you cannot run a Windows container on Debian or things like that. You have to run something which is sensibly compatible with the kernel you're running right now. It's a good compromise with virtualization in many cases because you don't have the performance hit of your hypervisor, and because it's quite easy to dive in actually. So in October 2018, I became a developer and I was like, there is LXC3. No one in the LXC team has the time to package LXC3, which is quite fine with me. So I offered to join the team and try to package LXC3 and its dependencies. It was out for 6 months. The feedback was quite good actually. And as it was an LTS release for all 3.0 release, I was like, it could be interesting to have it in Buster, but the freeze was coming in January, so I had roughly 3 months to package the thing, test it, and have it in testing properly working. So I was like, okay, if I try to motivate people, it won't work. I have to do it by myself, or we miss the train. First of all, let's talk a little about the major changes. So, as I said, I'm a system and network administrator and engineer. So, when a command has a weird argument like a -n to say the name of the container, which is mandatory for each and every command, I'm unhappy because I have to type more letters. So when I realized that they were removing the need to the -n arguments, I was like, oh, that's nice. It's really the best reason to get LXC3 in Debian. And on a more serious stance, it has a full cgroup 2 support, and I really like unified cgroups, which are, in my opinion, more intuitive. I know that many people disagree, but in my opinion, it's more intuitive. They were removing the bindings in Lua and Python 3 from the main package, and I agree that this code was useless in the main package. It has to be offered separately because it's not needed for LXC to work. They were removing a lot of dead code. I will come back to it. And the PAM-CGFS module, which creates the cgroups for the unprivileged users upon login, was merged into LXC3 from LXCFS. And it's a great improvement because you don't really need LXCFS anymore to run a container. Still, LXCFS is still useful, but it just does proc masking. The configuration changed a little. Some obsolete config was removed. New config were created. Upstream was nice enough to provide a binary to update your configuration, so it was quite easy to handle. And they were dropping. Okay, so it's definitely too small. My bad for that. They did a lot of cleaning. They removed 2 drivers that were not useful anymore. They removed a lot of code lines that were written because of these drivers, and so it made the whole project a little smaller, more maintainable. So, regardless of the functionalities for the users, it was still a great improvement because it made the code more maintainable. It had some impacts on the packaging because we had to include new source packages for the Python 3 and Lua bindings. We had to, so on the good side, the patches that we had in the Debian package were all included upstream so we didn't need it anymore. And on the bad side, adding to the free source packages to add, we had to take care about AppArmor support, which was quite moot. So we had to do a lot of patching. Happily, some people kind of made the work more easy. I will come back to it. So why was I motivated despite this workload? At the same time I became a developer, I was trying to move from my old dedicated server to the new one. So I was rethinking my whole architecture, and I decided that LXC would be the basic stone. So I wanted to have something up to date with my needs. As I said, I don't like the -n argument, so it was really a good incentive to update the packages. And as a new DD, I was like, okay, I should try to dive in some new projects because, mainline 3 was a done job. Maintaining the dependencies of mainline 3 was really nice, but I wanted to try new projects. So it was really interesting to start with this one. Let's speak a little about unprivileged containers. So a specific part of the changes in LXC3 was to make unprivileged containers more reliable and more working. An unprivileged container, also known as a user container, is a container that relies on user namespaces. So user namespaces were merged in the kernel in 2013, so it's a 6 years old technology. There were some issues that got solved in these 6 years. The idea is that root on the container is not root anymore on the host. It looks like a small change, but it implies a lot of coding, and it also implies a lot of things in case you arrive to, you succeed at evading from the container. Because instead of being root on the server, you will be like a random user on the server. If this user is properly confined, it can help to avoid kind of a hard privilege escalation. As for an example, here's one of the containers I run on my server, which is hosting a webmail. So I have a runcube user. Actually, the webmail is not runcube, but I don't care. With running the main LXC process, and after that, you see that we have a lot of UIDs that are kind of big and not associated with any username. So that's the sub-UIDs and sub-GIDs feature of the kernel, which is at work here. It allows to have a full user space in the container. So if I were to do a SSH or LXC3, all these UIDs would resolve to a specific user, like www-data or things like that. The main idea is that this user has no right to go outside of his home directory, and he has a really constrained resources on the server. He cannot use more than a specific volume of RAM. He can't write anything except on a dedicated file system. It is limited in the user is limited in the number of processes he may spawn, and all the sub-UIDs and GIDs here are tied to the user, so they are also limited in. So actually, the user plus the sub-UIDs and GIDs can spawn up to 100 processes at the same time. So it also avoids the issues with fork bombs and things like that. It takes little configuration to arrive to something like that. The main issue is that when you start your container, you have to bind a network interface. So you have to use a setuid binary, which is LXC-net, to bind a network card to the container. It's probably the only place where you have to involve actual root to the job. Nope. Why is it an interesting topic? Because at LSS 2019 in the US, which was a little months ago, the LXC developers recommended to use preferably unprivileged containers over privileged containers. Their argument is that in any case, when you succeed at having a privilege escalation on a privileged container, it's always a mess. And when you succeed to have a privilege escalation as an unprivileged container, it's less of a mess generally. The main issue with use unprivileged container is that the AppArmor integration is actually null. So you have to run the container as unconfined for AppArmor. It's something that should be solved in the next LTS release, I guess. And we saw that some tricky evasions with privilege escalation were possible. A good example is unprivileged container plus overlay FS. You can go and have a read to this LWN article. It's quite nice and interesting to see how people can think about how to mess up with something which is supposed to work properly. So to come back to the specific AppArmor issues, for unprivileged containers, there's nothing to say. It's not working right now. For privileged containers, we had issues with systemd v240 and later, which were preventing us to have a proper AppArmor integration with LXC3. It's the part that took me the more patching and work on the package. We used snippets of codes from the 3.1 version of LXC that we backported in the 3.0.3. And happily, Proxmox developers already done part of this work. So it made the thing easier for me. And I got some help from other developers. So when you run a privileged container, you probably want to use the lxc.apparmor.profile equals generated in your configuration, so the AppArmor support is properly handled. And oh, that's funny, my slide is messed up. And you can also use the allow underscore nesting configuration variable to enable nested containers. I don't know what's written down, but I'm pretty sure it's not interesting. Let's come back to what's missing, because right now I was not able before Buster to do all the things I wanted to do for LXC. So there are two components that are missing. The first one is LXD. LXD is kind of an orchestrator for LXC. It's in Go, which is the main reason I failed to include it properly in the archive, because as every Go package is, it depends on the whole planet to be included in the project. And some dependencies included dqlite, I will come back to it, were not packageable in the current state of where they are. So LXD is mostly a REST API, which it's a server with a REST API that can do whatever you ask it to do, provided you authenticate against it. It works remotely, which is quite nice. So you can have kind of a cluster of containers, hosts. And it features more advanced resource control than what LXC can do with C groups, basically. So you can tie a container to specific CPUs. You can properly swap network cards or things like that. It's really interesting to see it. But as I said, I was not able to have it in the archive because of dqlite. dqlite is a technology from Canonical which is supposed to enable SQLite to be a distributed database system. So between many hosts, it's supposed to offer a distributed infrastructure of SQLite. The first thing I thought when I saw that is, what the fuck? I still think that. But that's not the reason I want to talk about it. The thing is, dqlite depends on a patched version of SQLite, which still is installed as libsqlite. So actually, it conflicts with the current version of SQLite we have in Debian. So there are two solutions. Either I try to have the patches Canonical did into their SQLite into our SQLite. I'm not really keen on this solution. Or I include this as a SQLite-next gen, I don't know exactly. And you have to choose between this one and the original one when you install your system. And it's kind of messy too. So for now, the current solution was to not package it and so not have LXD in Debian. The idea of Canonical, in particular of one of the developers, was to propose the patch set to SQLite upstream and to have it included in the original SQLite. I have fears that this method won't work. SQLite are quite conservative on the changes they accept from their community. The second thing I want to talk about is Distro Builder. Distro Builder is a technology that is supposed to replace LXC-templates, which is the common way to build images for LXC. So it's not so common anymore, it's more like deprecated. It's also in Go, and it allows to build images for both LXC and LXD. In particular, it's useful because an unprivileged user could build images for his container with that. What's interesting is that currently, when an unprivileged user wants to build to make a container, he has to download a prefetched image, which is a table. It will unpack right on place. It's not as good as being able to run a debootstrap, but we don't have a fine solution for that, and Distro Builder is one of the answers. It was not really unpackageable, but on the timeline I had, having all the dependencies of Distro Builder in Debian was really not possible. So it's something that probably should be seen in Bullseye without any issue. But LXD will be probably more of a hard work. So about LXC3, it's all I wanted to present, but I have a specific request. If some people are interested in the technology, please don't hesitate to come and offer your help, because we have a lot of things to do to get the LXC and its dependencies in a more stable shape. It's a nice technology. It's not really hard to package, actually. I didn't have to change anything in the Debian/rules files or things like that. It was more about patching and including features that were missing to have a stable release. And if some people like Go, it would be a good idea to find people who like Go and who wanted to package some things in order to get Distro Builder and LXD in the archive. So please don't hesitate to come, and if you have questions regarding either LXC3 or the packaging, feel free to ask. We have something like 8 minutes in front of us.
Might be a provocative question, but what is the problem with the current Snap packages? Because I use LXD and I just had to apt install Snap and Snap install LXD and I was up and running.
I don't think it's a provocative question. It's a good one. I'm not really fond of Snap, and it's more of a personal opinion. I guess it was a choice for Canonical, which was quite rational. They have many LTS releases at the same time, many versions. They want to provide the same software in. And so Snap was a way to answer to that very specific issue. In Debian, we have Debian LTS, but I won't talk about it because I'm not really working in it. But actually, we have one stable version at a time. And to this matter, I think it's more interesting to have packages that are designed to work all together in a stable release, instead of having kind of artifacts that you can install whenever you want, but that you are not sure that will work properly with other artifacts made by other people. So it's more a way of thinking on the long run. But I think Snap is quite a decent solution, and I won't advise against it as long as we are not able to provide something as interesting in the archive.
We still have a few minutes.
LXC3 is nice. It's a good software. Okay, so I think everybody wants a break.
Thank you, Pierre-Elliott.
Welcome.